Hi, welcome to the fifth video tutorial of the OSL programming nodes add-on. In this video, I'll be talking about loops. Loops are functions that are executed several times directly after each other. They've got their own node tree again, the loop nodes. In this video, we'll be creating a loop function that blurs a texture in one direction. I'll create a new function over here, the texture blur loop. And you'll of course need to add the input and output nodes. Now these input and output nodes are a bit different from other functions because the inputs and outputs have to be the same. For example, you can't add a parameter to the output node, you need to add it to the input node and it automatically gets added to the output as well. This is because these values have to be passed to the next iteration of the loop each time. For example, if you create a loop that multiplies a number by 2 each time, you connect the input value to the multiply node, set it to 2, and then you connect it to the output. Now every iteration, this output value will be passed to the next iteration and will be the input value again. Alright, I'll just remove this and add in the texture that we are going to blur. We'll just use a simple Voronoi texture. We want two input values. The first one is the scale and the coordinates. And we of course need a third value, which is the value that gets passed on each iteration, which is the sum of all the textures. Now, if I don't connect anything to these output values, they remain the same each iteration. The total number of iterations is defined from outside the loop node using a loop node inside of the shader. So right now there's only one. It's called the repeat node, and here I can select the loop function. And I can set the number of iterations over here. For example, if I set this to 10, this loop will be executed 10 times. Every iteration, I want to sample this texture at a different position. So I need to transform the coordinates. To do so, we've got the loop input or node, the loop iteration node, which returns the index of the iteration. So if you run 10 iterations, it will go from 0 to 9. We will be blurring the texture in one direction, so we'll have to add a value to the x-coordinate of the texture coordinates. And we want to control the strength of this, of course. So we'll just add a new parameter, which is called strength, and multiply it with the loop iteration. Next, we need to really add it to the texture coordinates. For that, we can also just use a math node. But we only want to add it along the x-coordinate. So we first have to construct a vector from this, which has only one value. Like this, just a combine node. Before we can use this, we need to do something else as well, because the strength of the blur should be controlled by only the strength input value. But right now, if you increase the number of iterations, the total number of the total amount of blur will increase as well. But we want it to be constant no matter the number of iterations. And to do that, we need to divide the loop iteration by the total number of iterations. When we do that, this value will go from 0 to 1, no matter the number of iterations. So we need to add another input of type integer. And we'll just divide this value by the total number of iterations. And whenever we set this to, say, 10, we need to set this to 10 as well. Once we've done that, the quality of the blur will be controlled by the number of iterations, and the strength of the blur will be controlled by only this parameter. Before we go any further, I'm just going to rename all these values or all these variables. Right now, the repeat node doesn't get updated yet. I'll add this functionality in a future update. This is the texture. These are the total number of iterations. And I have to add this to the output as well. So the texture, the strength, iterations. So I'll just leave these at what they are. I can now press the update button of the repeat node and the names will get updated. So next we'll just add the shader input parameters, which are the scale, the coordinates, the strength, and the number of iterations. We can't change it because the number of iterations is constant right now. I'll rename these as well. So scale, coordinates, and strength. Now the output of this repeat node will be the sum of 10 texture samples. So we need to divide it by the total number of iterations. And then we can simply connect it to the shader output. So the final step is of course compiling the code, refreshing the node. Now we just need a scale for the texture and some coordinates. I'll just use object coordinates. And a blur strength. I'll switch to another model so that you can see the blur a bit better. So right now we've just got a Voronoi texture. And once we increase the blur, the texture gets blurs in one direction. So this isn't vertical or along all axes, it's just one direction. To really have three-dimensional blur, you need 3 loops. And as you can imagine, it will take a lot more time to compute. So just like with all the other functions, you can nest loops and if statements and the other functions. So you can create very complex materials. Right now there's only one kind of loop node, the repeat node. And in a future version of this add-on, I will be adding a new loop node that lets you determine the number of iterations dynamically so that you can add it as an input parameter.